Do our votes really matter? Alright, let's get straight to the point. Do our votes really matter? I mean, really matter? You've probably heard the saying, every vote counts, but do we honestly believe that? With so much noise around election time, it can start to feel like the fate of the world is being decided by a handful of people, while the rest of us just watch from the sidelines. But hang on a second, what if your vote could be the difference? Let's take a moment and consider how we got here. Elections have been a cornerstone of democracy for centuries. But here's the catch. It's easy to feel disconnected from the process. The political system is big, complicated, and can seem impersonal. But at the same time, the whole idea of voting is woven into the fabric of what it means to be part of a community. It's like the ultimate form of participation. So why do we sometimes feel like it doesn't matter? First, let's look at the numbers. It's often said that voter turnout in elections is lower than it should be. And it's true. In many places, especially during midterms or local elections, fewer people turn out to vote. Why is that? Why does it seem like, for some, voting just doesn't hold the same weight? Some people believe it's because they feel like their single vote won't make a difference in the grand scheme of things. I mean, let's be real. How can one person's vote change anything when you're up against millions of others? The odds can feel pretty slim. But here's the thing. While it might seem like your vote isn't important, that's actually a bit of an illusion. Every election, no matter how big or small, is a collection of individual votes. Every single one of those votes counts. In fact, in some cases, elections have been decided by just a handful of votes. Think about the 2000 US presidential election between Al Gore and George W. Bush. That election came down to a couple hundred votes in Florida. Imagine that if a few thousand more people had voted, history could have played out totally differently. Suddenly, that one vote doesn't seem so insignificant, does it? So, what does this tell us? It tells us that every vote has the potential to matter. Even if it feels like you're just a drop in the ocean, those drops add up. It's the reason why people in smaller districts or swing states often feel like their votes matter more. A few votes in a swing state can be the difference between victory and defeat. There's even a phenomenon called the voting paradox, where people feel like their vote doesn't matter, so they don't vote, but then when enough people think that way, the outcome ends up being decided by a small group. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people feel like they don't matter, the less they show up, and the fewer votes there are, the more weight each individual vote carries. But let's dig even deeper. What about those people who say, okay, I get that my vote might matter in some elections, but what about my personal vote? I'm just one person in a sea of millions, how could it really make a difference? Well, here's where things get interesting. Even though individual votes might seem small, they're never really just one vote. When you vote, you're telling the world that you care. You're making your voice heard in a system designed to listen, and that's powerful. It's not just about the outcome, it's about participation. It's about being a part of something larger than yourself. And don't forget, elections are a marathon, not a sprint. Sure, it might seem like one vote isn't enough to sway an election, but the truth is, elections are made up of millions of these single votes. If enough people feel empowered to vote, change can happen. Think of it like a snowball effect. It starts small, but it builds. Maybe your vote alone wouldn't tip the scales, but imagine if everyone who thought their vote didn't matter decided to vote instead. Suddenly, the result could be different, right? And remember, democracy isn't a spectator sport. We all have a role to play. So, let's take a step forward together, let's make our voices heard, and let's vote for the future we want to see. Because, at the end of the day, it's not just about the power of one vote, it's about the power of all of us. Thanks for watching, and if you agree, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is voting something you feel strongly about? Or do you still have doubts? I'd love to hear what you think. Let's take a look at the bigger picture. The government, at least in democratic countries, is supposed to represent the people. When you vote, you're sending a message to those in power saying, I want my voice to be heard. That's the foundation of a democracy representation. But when people don't vote, that message doesn't get sent. And then, politicians only have to listen to the people who do show up, those who vote. So, if we really want to shape the future of our communities, we've got to be part of the process. Otherwise, we're leaving decisions up to a smaller group of people who might not represent our best interests. It's easy to feel like your individual vote won't make a difference, but voting is more than just a single decision. It's part of a larger, collective action that shapes the future of society. Let's talk about this a bit more. We all know the power of big movements in history. The civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, even more modern efforts like those pushing for climate change action, all of these movements were powered by people showing up. They got people to vote, and over time, they sparked massive shifts in the social and political landscape. Sure, these movements involved millions of people, but if each individual thought they didn't matter and set out, nothing would have changed. It's a reminder that change happens when people come together and make their voices heard. So no, it's not about one vote, it's about the collective power of everyone who votes. It's about a shared commitment to the future. Now, let's talk about a topic that comes up a lot: voter apathy. This is the idea that people don't vote because they feel like it's all the same, there's no point, and nothing's going to change anyway. This is where we start to see how the illusion of not making a difference can take over. It's easy to get frustrated and think that the system is broken. After all, we've all heard the complaints. Politicians never do what they say they'll do, or nothing ever changes, so why bother voting? And while those frustrations are real, they don't mean we should give up on voting altogether. Let's be real, when was the last time you felt like a politician actually represented your exact views? It's probably been a while, right? The reality is that in most elections, there's no perfect candidate. But even if the candidate you vote for doesn't win, voting for the one who aligns most closely with your values sends a message. It shows you care. It shows that you're invested in the system, even if the system doesn't always work perfectly. And here's another thing. Politicians are more likely to listen to those who vote, not just those who complain. Okay, let's address one last concern that people often have: the idea that voting is a flawed system to begin with. It's true. Many systems like the Electoral College in the US can sometimes make it feel like your vote doesn't count as much as it should. And sometimes it can feel like your choices are limited to the two major parties that dominate the political landscape. But here's the kicker: voting isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Even if the system isn't perfect, voting is still one of the most powerful tools we have to influence change. When we don't vote, we're not just opting out of a flawed system, we're giving up the power to shape it. So, here's the bottom line. Yes, your vote does matter. It might not always feel like it, but that's the illusion of control at play. When we take the time to vote, we're participating in something bigger than ourselves. We're telling the world that we care about the direction our communities and our countries are heading. And if we really want change, we have to show up. Every vote counts, not just in the outcomes of elections, but in the broader, collective message it sends. So, the next time you hear someone say, "My vote doesn't matter," remind them, it absolutely does.